Alright, let's begin Lab 5, Designing for Network Connectivity. In this lab, exercise 5.1 is configuring the IP settings, exercise 5.2, installing and configuring DHCP server, exercise 5.3, troubleshooting DNS, exercise 5.4, creating a Windows firewall outbound rule, and the lab challenge is importing a Windows firewall rule into a GPO. For this lab, we need both of our Win8 clients, Win8A and Win8B, up and running, and RWDC01. Exercise 5.1, Configuring IP Settings. In this exercise, we're going to configure the IP settings for Windows 8 system. And the mindset is, as an administrator, you have to know how to configure this manually. So on Win8B, which is what we're on right now, we're logged in as administrator, and we'll continue on. Now, in the instructions, they tell us to go onto the desktop tile, mouse over, here's our tile, right click, and they're telling us to go into the network status icon. Well, that ain't there. This is the network status icon over here. We're going to right click it and open the network and sharing center. Going to change adapter settings. They're asking us to disable this. We've already got it disabled. So we'll move on to this part here. Double click on it, and this calls up the private network status. Click on here, and this gives us the details. So we see our IPv4 address for question number 1 is 192.168.1.81. Our subnet mask is 255.255.255.0. We have no default gateway, and our DNS server is 192.168.1.50, which is RWDC01. Now what they want us to do is change the IP address. We'll click on Properties, scroll down to IPv4, click on Properties again, and they want us to put this machine into a different network. The network we're putting this into is the 192.168.2.0 network. That's our network. This is our host IP. We're going to keep the same subnet mask, and we have no default gateway. And we're going to keep our DNS server the same. Now, question number 2 is, what problems are caused by the current default gateway settings? Well, the problem is we don't have a default gateway, which means that we're stuck within this network. And question number 3 is, what addresses could you assign the default gateway that would indicate a local router? 192.168.2.0 is the network address. 192.168.1.255 is the broadcast address. You cannot give a host address of any type that's either the network or the broadcast. That effectively reduces our range from 256 IP addresses to 254, which is why our range is 192.168.1.1 to 192.168.1.254. They're not telling us to change this back, so we're going to keep the 8B into the 192.168.2. network. Click OK, close, and close. On to exercise 5.2, install and configuring a DHCP server. Overview: in this exercise, we'll install a DHCP server and create a DHCP scope. Then we'll configure a client to use that DHCP scope. In most organizations, Windows clients are configured using DHCP. Therefore, you should know how to install the DHCP services and how to create and configure DHCP scopes. And this is actually very, very important. You don't want to run around as a network admin manually configuring IP addresses. You want to have some server that automates that process, and that's the DHCP server. In case you didn't know, DHCP stands for Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol. And it's actually one of the core network services that you're going to wind up having, along with DNS, to make sure that any network that you have actually runs and you can do something with. Now we have to go on to RWDC01, so let's just do that. And they want us to go to Manage, Add Roles and Features. Click next, 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 and we're going to add the DHCP service. So here's DHCP server, and by default it's going to add in the tools as well. We want to add those features. Select next, next, next. I always like to put this in to restart if that's ever necessary. And now we start the installation. Okay, and our DHCP server is now installed. Now we have to go and configure it. Okay, let's do it the way the book asks us to. So it wants us to go to Tools, select DHCP, and here's the DHCP MMC. And it wants to click here. Now you'll note, see these two little red down arrows? That means these aren't up and running. What we have to do now is we have to configure this. We're going to click IPv4, right click, and choose New Scope. And let's follow the wizard. And for here, we're going to type in normal scope. If I could spell. No description. Click next. Our starting IP address, they want us to put in 192.168.1.40. And the end IP address is 192.168.1.45. And keep the same 24-bit subnet mask. Now here, this is our pool of addresses that we're going to hand out to clients. So we're going from 40 to 45. This will give us 5 clients that we can have on this network using DHCP. Click next. We're not going to have any exclusion delay. We'll click next. Now, question number 4, what's the default lease duration? And our default lease duration for this server is going to be 8 days. Click next. And it's going to ask us if we want to configure DHCP options. We'll click next. And IP address for routers used by clients. They want us to put in 192.168.1.20. Select next. Keep the parent domain. And they want us to remove any IP addresses here. And they want us to add in 192.168.1.50. Select next. Win servers. We don't have any. Click next. Now, this is asking us if we want to activate this scope now. This is the scope that we're activating. And finish. Now you'll note we've done all the configuration and we still have this little red down arrow. What we have to do is we have to authorize this. Now note, it's asking us to authorize this DHCP server. So let's just do that. We'll go over here to rwdco1.contoso.com, right click, and select authorize. Then we have to press the F5 key, and voila! Our red down arrows have now turned to green check marks. Instead of F5, you can also hit the little icon here for refresh. Sometimes MMCs aren't, let's say, the best for updating. What you may have to do sometimes, you're going to get some experience with this, is you're going to wind up having to close the MMC, fire it back up, and then it's going to wind up getting the proper information out to you and properly refreshed. Okay, so now we have our DHCP configured and up and running. Let's test it by going to Win8b. Go back to the networking. Change our adapter settings. IPv4 properties. And we'll check obtain an IP address automatically and obtain DNS server addresses automatically. This configures this system here to get its addressing information via a DHCP server. We'll click close, close. I just disable and re-enable, force a habit. Okay, so now let's see what address we got. You see we have our numbers incrementing here, so we know we got some network connectivity. And here we go. Our IP address is now 192.168.1.40. Our default gateway 1.20, which we configured. Our DHCP server is 1.50, which is our WDC01, and our DNS server is 1.50 as well. Now the book's asking us to go in, call up a command prompt, and do the IP config. You guys have done that often enough. I don't have to show that to you again. Next step is we're going to go back to our WDC01, and they want us to deauthorize the server. So we're going to unauthorize it. And it's warning us removing authorization from the server from the directory will cause the DHCP server to stop responding to client requests. Are you sure you want to do this? Yep. Once again, you'll note it's still showing red, or green rather. We'll refresh. Now it's red and down. Go back to here. And they want us to go in to the command prompt. Just going to pin this to the taskbar and type in ipconfig and do release. What this command does is it releases the IP address, and it'll make the system go out and ask for another IP address. And there we go. And we haven't gotten a response back. Now the other command they want us to run is the ipconfig renew. This forces the system to try and get a new address. Now this is going to take quite a while. While it's doing that, I'm just going to explain something here. If it can't find an IP address, the next thing it's going to wind up doing is it's going to self-assign an address. That's called an APIPA address, which is self-assigned. You always note that if you ever see an IP address that starts with 169, that is a self-assigned address. You don't have a DHCP server running on your network, or your system is not connected to any network. That's a major tip for doing network troubleshooting. Okay, while it's still going about its business here, we'll go into details, and there you go, 169.254, and there's our APIPA address. Go back to our command prompt, and there you go. Windows IP configuration error occurred while renewing the interface. Private network unable to contact your DHCP server. The request is timed out, and this is borne out by the fact that we have our self-assigned address. And that concludes exercise 5.2. So let's just finish off here, make sure that we can get ourselves some addressing so we get some network connectivity going on for the next part of the lab. Go back to RWDC, right click, authorize, hit a little refresh, boom, green check marks. Go back to our client, ask for an address, And there we go. So now we got 192.168.1.40. Just so you know, this ipconfig release and renew, that is the same as going here and going disable, then re-enable, which is why I do it. Now that we've got an address, we'll move on to exercise 5.3, which is troubleshooting DNS. In this exercise, we're going to use NSLOOKUP in the DNS console to test DNS. When users cannot resolve IP addresses by hostname, users cannot access more resources and services. When these problems occur, you should check if the user is pointing to the correct DNS server as shown in previous exercises. Also, they will need to know how to use the available troubleshooting tools such as NSLOOKUP. Now, before we really get into the lab here, two of the problems that I've noticed over and over again that most of you have had during this semester is on the connectivity side of things. What I wind up seeing time and time again when I get called over to assist you guys when you're getting stuck in your labs is you'll get to a dialog box, well, I'm trying to connect to this server and I can't. If you can't connect to the server, one, you got to make sure that you have network connectivity to that server. That server is up and running, and you can at least ping it, which is why I say at the beginning of all the labs, not a bad idea to try and ping the lab or try to connect to a network share if you're trying to get to RWDC01. The other thing is DNS. When you do a ping, I'll just give an example here. So if I ping RWDC01, I should get a response back, and here is the response I get. rwdc01.contoso.com, which is 192.168.1.50, and I get a reply. This tells me, just by pinging the name, that I've got DNS up and running properly, and the server name is actually in the DNS server. If I ping RWDC01, just give an example. And disable the network adapter. And I'm going to try this again. Ping RWDC01, and I can't find anything. It's not even trying. Whenever you see this pop up this fast, you know that your network card is not connected. So let's connect back to our network. We just double click. That enables. Get that out of the way. Get this out of the way. Now in troubleshooting, this is a DNS test. If we want to do a basic network connectivity test, we'll ping the server by the IP address. And there we go, we got a reply back through network connectivity. If we get the IP address and we wind up getting a ping result that's successful, we know that the network's up and running. If we ping by name and we do not get anything, we know DNS is down. Now another way of doing it is the way that we're going to do it here. Now they want us to use a command called NSLOOKUP. That's Network Services Lookup. So it's NSLOOKUP, and we have to put in the fully qualified domain name, win8a.contoso.com. And here we see the server that's giving us back the information is RWDC01, and its address is 192.168.1.50. And the lookup for win8acontoso.com, its IP address is 192.168.1.80. And handily enough, that's the answers for questions 10 and 11. Now, NSLOOKUP is a command pretty much the same as DISM. So if I just type in NSLOOKUP, make note of the prompt. Right here, this is called the prompt. You note the prompt is now changed, and this is the NSLOOKUP prompt. So from this prompt, we're just going to type in win8a. And we get the same information again. Now, the we're going to look at our SOA record. What the SOA is start of authority for Contoso.com, and we're going to execute the following command. So set type start of authority, is Contoso.com. Now here we see a couple little goodies as far as DNS is concerned. We see the serial is 76. Every time the DNS server will make a change, it will increment the number up one. If you have multiple servers and things just aren't working right, it's usually because the secondary server has a higher serial number than the primary, and things will wind up going out of sync. It's set to refresh every 900 seconds, which is 15 minutes. It will retry every 600 seconds, which is 10 minutes. The records are set to expire in 86,400 seconds, which is 1 day, and the default time to live is 3,600 seconds or 1 hour. And we see our two internet addresses for our WDC01. We see our internal address of 192.168.1.50 and our external NICS address of 192.168.1.154. And last but not least here, it wants us to go back over to our WDC01. We'll close this, go into Tools, go into DNS, right click, go to Properties. And what we're going to go into is on monitoring. It wants us to do the following: a simple query against a DNS server and a recursive query against a DNS server. We'll test, and we got a pass. Exercise 5.4, creating a Windows Firewall outbound rule. In this exercise, we'll create a Windows Firewall outbound rule. By default, Windows Firewall allows only certain packets from the computer. Therefore, you must know how to adjust the firewall to allow additional outgoing packets as needed. On Win8b, it wants us to access the control panel by clicking down here into the thumbnail, go into Control Panel, System and Security, Windows Firewall, and then Advanced Settings. Before we go any further, question 13, you just installed a new application, but users cannot connect to the application remotely. What features should be checked to ensure that it's not preventing users from accessing the remote application? Answer: Windows Firewall. Earlier on, some of you, when I'd go around, I'd have you ping either Win8a or Win8b from the servers, and you wouldn't get a response back, but you get a response if you pinged either of the servers from the clients. The reason that you got that one-way connectivity is because the servers, when they pinged, they're banging up against the firewall on the clients. As soon as you disabled the firewall, the ping packets would get through and you get a response. Okay, so let's click on Outbound Rules, choose New Rule. We're going to select a program, next, and we're going to browse for Internet Explorer. The way to normally do that, we'll use our good old friend, a system variable, for program files. Internet Explorer. And IEExplore.exe. Select Next, and on the new Outbound Rule Wizard page, we'll select Next. So we're going to block the connection here. And this rule applies to the domain, private and public. Next. And we're going to type in IE restriction. And for the description, because the number one source of viruses usually going to wind up being IE. And we'll click finish. And that's how you configure the rule. Now on to the lab challenge. Alright, so the lab challenge is to complete the challenge, you will import the Windows Firewall rule you created in exercise 5.4 into a GPO, and then you'll apply the GPU to the sales OU. If the sales OU does not exist, you must create a sales OU and move the computer Win8A into the sales OU. You are the administrator for the Contoso Corporation. Since you created a Windows Firewall rule in the last exercise, you need to save that into a GPO so it can be automatically applied to the users. Alright, so where we're going to have to go here is over to RWDC01. Go to Server Manager, Tools, Active Directory Users and Computers, and Contoso. We're going to create a new organizational unit. Sales. Oh, we already have a sales, so we don't have to even do that. There we go. Under the computers container, we're going to wind up selecting Win8B. Win8B. We're going to go move, and we're going to move it over to sales. Close that. Okay, so let's go over to Win8B again here. Okay, let's export our policy. Highlight this. Go to here. Export policy. In our WDC01 software. We'll type in IE restrict. Click save. And we successfully exported our policy. Okay, so we're going to go to outbound rules. We're going to delete this. Yep. Reason we're deleting this is we're going to see once we apply it whether or not it comes back. Let's go back to RWDC01. Tools. Go to Group Policy Management. Go here to Group Policy Objects. Create new. And we're going to call this IE restriction. Click OK. Right click on it. Edit. Okay, now we're going to go into the Computer Configuration Policies Windows Settings, Security Settings, Windows Firewall with Advanced Security. Policies, Windows Settings, Security Settings, move this over, Windows Firewall with Advanced Security. Once we're here, we'll go Import Policy. Yep. Software. We'll select IE restrict. Open. We've imported the policy. If we go into here, outbound rules, you now see IE restrict is successfully imported. We'll close this. And let's see if it actually worked. Back in Win8B, we don't have the rule. We'll close this. Let's reboot the system. Okay, now I want to remind you guys, when it comes to group policies, anything that's a computer group policy gets applied to the computer on reboot. If it's a user group policy, that gets applied when the user logs in. With that in mind, we'll log in here. control panel, system and security, Windows firewall, advanced settings, outbound rules. Okay, that didn't apply, so that means the group policy is not, or the group policy restriction is not in place. Back to RWCO1. Let's go to the sales OU, and we're going to link an existing GPO, i.e. restriction. There we go. Close that. Okay, Win8B is in our sales OU in AD users and computers. Okay, so let's see if second time's a charm. And there we go. Here's our IE restriction policy in place. And there's the lab challenge. So with that, I'd like to remind you guys, before you start any labs, make sure that you have basic network connectivity. This will also be important while you're playing around with your VMs for the upcoming years and upcoming classes. Don't forget your basic network troubleshooting for IP and DNS.